In the previous episode, we asked a question that most people only brush up against. Life, what's the point? And if you allowed that question to land, even for a moment, you may have noticed something. Your mind immediately began searching for an answer. But something deeper may have also happened. A subtle discomfort, a slight tightening in the body, maybe a sense of resistance. And that response tells us something very important. Because the real mystery is not the question itself. The real mystery is this. Why do we spend so much of our lives avoiding it? If you look carefully at modern life, you begin to notice a pattern. From a very young age, we are taught to move, achieve, advance, improve, optimize, produce. Success is framed as momentum. Stillness is framed as stagnation. And so we run, not always consciously, but almost always continuously. School becomes preparation. Career becomes identity. Productivity becomes proof. And achievement becomes the scoreboard by which we measure whether our lives are working. But beneath all of that movement, there is often a quiet assumption. If I just keep moving forward, I won't have to stop and ask why. Now let me say something clearly. There is nothing inherently wrong with productivity. There is nothing inherently wrong with ambition. There is nothing inherently wrong with building, creating, contributing, or achieving. Human beings are creative by nature. We are builders, dreamers, explorers. Creation is one of the most beautiful expressions of being alive. But there's a profound difference between creation and compulsion. Creation flows from alignment. Compulsion flows from avoidance. Creation feels expansive. Compulsion feels urgent. Creation invites participation. Compulsion demands proof. And if we're honest, most of modern life is organized around compulsion. Think about it. How often are we encouraged to pause and ask, why am I doing this? Why this career? Why this pace? Why this version of success? Why this identity? More often than not, those questions are seen as dangerous. They threaten the structure. They slow the machine. They disrupt the narrative that progress alone equals fulfillment. So instead of examining the architecture, we decorate the house. We improve our resume. We optimize our productivity systems. We refine our personal brand. And we call that growth. But sometimes growth is not expansion. Sometimes growth is simply complexity added to avoidance. At some point in life, many people experience a moment where the structure begins to crack. It might come through burnout, or illness, or financial disruption, or the sudden realization that achieving what we wanted did not actually bring the peace we expected. And in that moment, the question returns. Life, what's the point? But this time it lands differently, because now the question is not theoretical, it is personal. And you are no longer asking about life in general. You are asking about your life, the life you built, the structures you've invested in, the identity you spent years constructing. And that can be a frightening moment. Because if the answer is unclear, What does that mean about the path behind you? This is where many people panic. They rush to rebuild. New goals, new projects, new ambitions, anything to restore forward momentum. But occasionally a different response emerges. Instead of rebuilding immediately, someone pauses. They sit with the uncertainty. They allow the question to stay. And something very interesting begins to happen. The urgency begins to soften. The identity begins to loosen. And for the first time in a long time, the person begins to observe their life rather than simply run it. When that happens, a profound shift becomes possible. The question changes. Instead of asking, what should I achieve next? The person begins asking, what have I been chasing and why? And sometimes the answer is surprising. Sometimes we discover that the life we built was not truly chosen. It was inherited. A cultural script, a family expectation, a societal definition of success. We stepped onto the path because it was there, and we kept walking because stopping felt dangerous. But once you see the script, you cannot unsee it. And here's the beautiful paradox. When the old operating system begins to dissolve, life does not become meaningless. It becomes honest. You begin to see where your actions came from, where your motivations lived, where your energy was aligned, and where it was borrowed. And in that clarity, a different kind of movement becomes possible. Not frantic movement, not compulsive movement, but intentional movement. Movement that is not trying to outrun a question. Movement that is willing to live inside it. This is where episode 1 and episode 2 meet. In the first episode, we allowed the question to surface. Life, what's the point? In this episode, we examined something equally important. The life we built to avoid asking it. Because before we can explore what the point might be, we must first see clearly the structures that have shaped our lives so far. Not with judgment, not with regret, but with awareness. So here's the invitation for today. Look gently at the life you've built. Your work, your pace, your identity, your routines, your ambition. Ask yourself a simple question. Where in my life am I creating from alignment? And where am I moving from compulsion? Where does my energy feel expansive? And where does it feel like proof? You may not have answers immediately. That's okay. This is not a test. It is an observation. And sometimes observation is the beginning of transformation. Because when you stop running long enough to look honestly, something remarkable begins to happen. The question that once felt threatening begins to feel clarifying. The question that once felt destabilizing begins to feel liberating. And slowly, the question that once haunted you becomes the doorway to a different way of living. In our next episode, we will step even closer to that doorway. Because if the old operating system of identity and productivity begins to dissolve, something else must emerge. A different relationship with meaning. A different relationship with life itself. And perhaps a different understanding of what the point has been all along. Until then, stay curious, Stay honest and allow the question to continue working quietly within you. Life, what's the point? I'll see you in the next episode.